We're going to be joined now by Mike McAdams and Chris Fessler talking about the U.S. bioeconomy policy juggernaut, lessons and pitfalls, and of course with a new administration coming in, it'll be very interesting to hear what these two DC-based gentlemen have to say about what the future holds. Go ahead, Chris.
There's a new administration? I'm pleased to be back and to be sitting next to Mike, who is as veteran as a DC veteran gets. This guy has been through the fights from a whole bunch of different perspectives. He has seen Washington evolve over 4+ decades of his career. He's worked for big industry, he's worked for trade associations, so this is, and he has seen administrations come and go. He's been focused on the climate challenge his damn near your whole career. Yeah. And he's forgotten more about Washington than I've yet learned. So I think this is, I'm looking forward to the conversation. We had a bit of a lead-in with the conversation with Brian, so I know you're chomping to get at some of that. But let's just start general. Mike, what should people be thinking about now?
So people are thinking about, people in America spoke on Election Day, and it was pretty clear. They didn't like the policy of the Biden administration. They didn't like who executed the policy at the Biden administration. They didn't like the transparency of how they did it. And so I want to take just a minute, and because I think Lisa and Mike did an incredible job on the regulatory piece and explaining you the depth of the regulatory piece. So I think the first thing for me to do to help this crowd understand is to talk about how did we get there in the first place, right? How did we get there to where we had a 900-page tailpipe rule written in the Biden administration that went through total public comment that wound up banning the internal combustion engine by fiat in 1935, by fiat in 2035. How did we get that in a rule when you have a Congress sitting there? And this has been a systemic problem in Washington, D.C. for almost a decade, because we had very tight margins between the House and the Senate, and we kept flipping back and forth between one party having the Senate and one party having the House. But what you had was you always had a balancing. I think this is really significant going forward. You always had a balancing where the American people had a Democratic House when they had a Republican Senate, and they had a Democratic Senate when they had the Republican House. And when you have that and you have tight votes, you can't legislate. And so Chris, who's as good a professional in Washington, D.C., I would not tell you how long I've known him, because that would be not good for both of us. But we had for the first time in history, I mean, going back to when I started on the Hill in 1972, you had the pendulum swinging left to right far more volatilely, right, far more significantly. And so an administration would come in, and we've seen this. We saw the Trump administration in 2016. We're going to see it now in 2025. And then we had the Biden administration, who was completely 180 degrees opposite where Trump was. So here we're coming. You know, four years later, here we're coming, and we're going to go back 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So the nomenclature that we all had to use in Washington, D.C. was a nomenclature of climate change and carbon reduction and sustainability for the last 4 years. And the nomenclature going forward will have none of that. The nomenclature going forward, if you're going to have any success with a Republican Senate, a House Republican Speaker, and a Republican President, will be about job creation, America first, are we building manufacturing, energy security, and then the one the environmentalists never talk about is economic prosperity, because this crowd is about economic prosperity. And so the challenge for us will be to those of us who are representing you. And let me just say, I've been doing this for 47 years. It is a real honor to be able to represent people in this room and companies in this room. Mr. Foodie's one of my members. It's just really fun to do, and it's an enormous challenge, and I like building puzzles. So this is a puzzle we're going to build together. So that's kind of where we find ourselves right now. But the reason all those regs got done the way they got done is you couldn't legislate. And so what they did is the bureaucracy, and this is being talked about all around the world. This is being talked about in Europe. The bureaucracy got told what to do and to how to make it happen. So I'm going to give you an example of something I worked on personally that was completely out of nowhere. It came out of left field because Elon Musk had people in the White House. And we had to do an RVO. The most important program in America for renewable fuels is the Renewable Fuel Standard. So we had to have an RVO. But when Biden came in, he wanted to electrify everything. He really kind of threw liquid transportation, renewable fuels under the bus. I'm sorry, that's my opinion. I had a hard time with them, particularly on SAF. And so all of a sudden in the RVO rule, there's a whole new section brought to you by a bunch of new people that have never had anything to do with the RFS. And the compliance mechanism for the D3 pool for RINs was going to be e-RINs. So we invented a new thing. The Senate and House never put it in a piece of legislation. There's a theme here. And it winds up in this regulatory package, like 700-page regulatory package. So I called the White House up and I said, guys, you know, I represent a lot of people in the oil industry, and this guy, Musk, under your rules is going to make $3 billion, $3.4 billion in RINs for doing nothing. And I just wanted to ask you, did you talk to the Justice Department before you did this? And they said, why? And I said, because whether you realize it or not, you violated the antitrust law of the United States ×2 in this regulation. Because Mr. Musk sells 64% of the electric vehicles in the United States. And I'm telling you what, that was one of the easiest kill shots I ever did in my life. And it went away. But that is an example of...
And they still haven't answered that question.
They haven't.
Yeah,
they haven't.
That's right.
But, I mean, that is an example of what Mike was talking about, where unintended consequences from people that really aren't meeting with anybody, and you wind up with something that somebody wanted to do to move the thing left and to help the electric vehicles, and it winds up being completely illegal. Now, I want to tag one more thing onto that, because this is really significant, and most people do not understand this. And I'm a lawyer, and I don't know that I understand it. But the Supreme Court overturned a fundamental rule for the last 5 decades. They overturned a thing called Chevron deference. And Chevron deference was a prima facie case law for 5 decades. And it was trying to give the executive branch of government a little room to have the experts in the agencies kind of fill in the blanks. But the last 10 to 15 years, we've kind of gone crazy on allowing the blanks to not be filled by the legislators who our Constitution says has the power to tell the agencies what they want. And so the Hill got sloppy, and the Legislative Council got sloppy. You've done that, right? And this is not something the press understands. They don't think it's exciting. But I'm telling you what, this is a major, major development. It's going to make the people on Capitol Hill have to be far more specific about just what in the heck we're wanting to do in this legislation. It is also going to take the tailpipe rule, the California waiver rule, and a number of other these rules, and it is going to make a ton of money for my friends in the legal industry, because they are going to be suing everybody in every court saying Congress was arbitrary and capricious and they didn't have the authority to do this, right? So from a 64,000-foot piece, to just start my conversation off, this is really the scene we're in, and we won't really know what the top 10 or 15 things are until he gets, inaugurated on January 20th. I'll give you one more.
Let's actually use that as a great pivot point, because you've given a great overview of the run-up of the history, and it's both about the lawmaking, the regulatory process, but now we've introduced the judicial piece as well. Yeah. So uncertainty is the watchword going forward.
And that's why none of these people up here that are giving money away, there's total uncertainty, and a lot of them feel like, okay, well, this whole industry is dependent on the RFS. This whole industry is dependent on the tax code. And what do we have? Let's go to the tax code for a second.
Well, let me frame that in a lot. So this is a question from a previous, for my session with Brian, but it's exactly where I think you need to go and help shed some light. Okay. And so you can be broader than this, but let me just frame it in someone else's well-written words. So given that we've been here before, how do you foresee the bioeconomy industry faring under a second Trump presidency? So what's the future look like, Mike?
Okay, so what do we start with?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing we start with, in my world, is the map. Where is the electoral map? And look how much red there is. Look at where the red is. The red's in Wisconsin, the red's in Indiana, the red's in Kansas, the red's in Des Moines and in all of Iowa and North Dakota and South Dakota. Who is the head of the Department of Interior and the energy czar in the White House? This is another major difference he's going to bring in. This government is going to function from the White House. You're not going to have cabinet meetings where these guys are calling in to say, here's what we think you ought to do. Each cabinet person that has been asked and nominated to be in an agency was given a list of things to unwind. This guy has literally come in and he's turned every table in this room upside down, and then he had to go into the hall to find 2 more to turn over, right? That is what he's doing. He's turning Washington, D.C. upside down. There will be no more normality. And the question that the Washington Post is trying to tee up is, will the United States Senate raise to their constitutional obligation to make sure that these nominees are screened properly?
And we don't know the answer to that yet.
We do not.
So when you think about what the hit list is, we've heard things, and we know that the Trump team is famous for saying a lot of things and not doing all of them.
Back.
Right. So when you think about the regulatory agenda on the road ahead, you mentioned RFS, you mentioned tailpipe.
Let's do Treasury.
And you mentioned tax.
Let's do Treasury and EPA.
Yeah, let's start with tax.
Because so if you were to ask me what is the #1 crisis this afternoon for my industry in Washington, D.C., the answer is 45Z. That is the #1 crisis. Why? Because the Biden...
Not everybody in this room is going to be familiar.
Okay, 45Z is we have 40 Cap A, which was a blender's credit for $1 for blenders of biodiesel and renewable diesel and jet fuel. Then in the IRA, they added 40B, which is, and I'm just going to explain this so it's real simple. Door number A is 40B. From 0 to 50, you get $1.25. From 50 to 100, you get a penny, a CI point reduction, right? Door number B is 45Z. In December 31st of this year, 40B and 40A have been repealed by law by a legislative vote and signed by the President of the United States. So it's toast. The market is looking for the rules for 45Z. 45Z is the first thing we've ever done in tax law that picks winners and losers in feedstocks. Bad idea. That's what Michael was referring to without referring specifically to it, right? And so my guys are all sitting there, and there's no trading going on now. There's no forward curve. And everybody's saying, okay, well, we just lost $1 here and $1.25 there, and we have no rules in place from this administration on how to implement 45Z. So already there have been more than 60 organizations that have signed letters that say, if you can't get the 45Z rules out, you need to at least take the tax policy that predated IRA, and you need to put 40A and 40B and the alternative fuels mixture credit and the hydrogen credit and all these things back in play until you decide you want to finish the rule for 45Z. And so the market is looking at, where do I find this 80 cents? And it's not pretty. A year ago, the RIN price under the RFS program, which is still the most important thing for the biofuels industry in America, was $1.60, $1.80. And because the administration once again socked us in the nose on the RVO that they did in 23 by undershooting the D4 pool, which is the biomass-based diesel pool for biodiesel, jet fuel, and renewable diesel, they gave us 3.3 billion gallons of a mandate in 2025. Well, we're in 24, we're going to be in 25, and we're already over 4 billion, maybe 4.5 billion. And Andy Lipow is one of the best guys in the US. I had him do the numbers for me. The numbers were 7.3 billion in 26, maybe as high as 7.6. So we undershot the D4 pool volume by 40%, and the RIN went to 42 cents this year. Well, that's hard to make up on the street when you're trying to have a margin. And so you're going to see capacity decline. Further to add to this situation where we are now, and then I'll come back to you, is a number of folks in agriculture are really going at trying to create a preference for U.S. domestic feedstocks over foreign domestic feedstocks, right? My association's technology neutral, feedstock neutral. We do not like people trying to do protective policy. We are full free trade, free market, because of who I represent. And so it was very interesting last week that Xi from China went to Brazil and met with Lula, trying to cut his own deal, right? And he announced in Brazil that he was going to remove the 14 cent a gallon tax subsidy for exported UCO out of China. And then on top of it, he said, I'm going to put a 2% mandate for SAFN. So he just gave us the middle finger, sorry, because he said, I'm not going to allow that to go there anymore. We made 1 billion gallons worth of fuels under the RFS program out of that UCO. So it's gone now because he took the 2% and tied it to the amount of fuel that was coming here on UCO. And you know, and I tell you, EPA has never found one cargo, one instance of cheating, and they said that at the Chicago conference 2 weeks ago. And so this whole political, you know, let me trade my book has led to him, she's saying, okay, I'm just going to turn it off and I'm going to use it at home. And I'll add value at home by using the UCO. And I'm sure Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia love that, because then if there was anything nefarious going on, it's between them.
So we should move to the EPA rules, but I just want to put one other point on, and I'm not going to ask you to project on this, but just so everybody's aware, Mike was talking about all the regulatory implementation of the tax code. Oh, by the way, we're going to have another tax bill next year in the Congress, and so all of this is up for grabs once again at the legislative level. We'll have new tax law sometime in 2025, and all of these issues will be relitigated by Congress. So let's move to EPA. We've got the renewable fuel standard, we've got the tailpipe standards. Everybody in this room is going to be affected one way or another by where those go. So let's talk about those.
Yeah, and so let me give you a few examples of things that we need to fix on the regulatory side, specific examples. This is one of the things the other two didn't get to do, right? So I'm going to just take advantage of it. So there's a thing called biointermediates. It took me 11 years to remove the block of biointermediates. I mean, the original regulation said, if I'm going to take and I'm going to use biomass, that biomass has to be co-located with the facility that was going to turn it into fuel. Well, that's kind of dumb, because the refineries don't sit in the middle of the woods. And you know, that's what I call the common sense. Let's have a little common sense for starters. Let's start with common sense. And so I managed to get that removed. So you now can actually take the woods, turn it into pyrolysis oil or some other form, and it now can then go with transfer product documents and everything to a refinery facility that can turn it into fuel. But then they said, well, we're really worried about, you know, the chain of command here. And so they said, you're only allowed one customer. Okay, I don't know a better way in the world to have somebody own a facility in less than 30 days than to say you have one customer, right? That's not a good model. So we have to fix that. In addition, on the analytical side of the table, they said you're going to use carbon-14 dating on every batch. You're going to prove that the 10% that you're making is actually what you say it is, and the other 90% we're going to close an eye to, which is hydrocarbon-based oil, right? So that needs to be fixed. And then lastly, this is a real problem in the United States for all of you in the forestry industry, and I've been trying to talk to the U.S. forestry industry. I had a chance to talk to your guy from Canada, far more enlightened than the people in the United States, I just got to say. But the way the regulatory structure in EPA is set up for wood, it's very specific, thinnings and cuttings, right? And so if you have decaying wood or you have a forest fire, particularly if the forest fire was on a national park, which many of them are, you can't use that feedstock to generate a RIN. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to shrink your available feedstock? Now, my friend Brian over there was talking about the problem with the volume of feedstock. And he's absolutely right. The only way we get to where we need to be in 2050 is we need to take the top of the lid off of the existing feedstocks that are being used. I did a study in 2023, LMC all around the world, that showed that we had as much as 18 billion gallons worth of oil feedstock to make renewable diesel and potentially jet fuel. So if you're going to get to 35 or 50 billion gallons, then the wood's got to come in. We have over 700 million metric tons a year of wood residue with all the restrictions. But the EPA rules won't let you use most of that wood. If you're a sawmill, that wood doesn't get a RIN, right? So that has to be fixed. The forest industry in Canada and America need to work on that together so we have a similar set of rules. Those things would make a major difference to the guys that have the money funding you, because it would see a clear path to economic growth.
So you have as good insight as anybody on the way that major global oil and gas players think about investing and think about the road ahead with energy transition challenges and opportunities. I'd like you to spend a minute talking about from your perspective, what I'm seeing, and you can shoot this down, but what I'm seeing is there's a lot of money that's not branding itself as climate change, energy transition, hedge fund money, that is really chasing opportunities that are all about the energy transition.
Yes, I'm going to tie that to your other question about how do we go from here, right? So you use the upstream side of the industry, which Trump likes, and he's already got a set of things that he's given to the Interior, he's given to FERC on pipelines, he's given to EPA on the RFS, he's already given them a number of things that I want to overturn these things, I want them out of the way. I mean, in the Biden administration, all of those rules he passed a 600-page rule every 30 days for half a year. Those cost $300 billion, and the American people never even saw it. They only saw it when the people that had to spend the money to comply had to spend the money and their prices went up, and they wonder where the inflation came from. None of that was overviewed. That is going away. That is a good thing. We're going to have a cleaning the house. We're going to really have to ask ourselves, if we're going to do the climate change, climate reduction, and he and I have been on this same page on this for a long, long time, then it's got to be counting all the carbon. We've got to have a similar model as close as we can get around the world. We've got to work around the world, so it's not just us. This is not we're going to beat you. The Western Hemisphere is absolutely strategically advantaged in this game of the bioeconomy. We should actually just double down and win, as the one gentleman said. I think he's going to start with the opening of more drilling and other things. But because those major companies, and I represent 14 of them, the biggest in the world, those companies are going to also have downstream portions because they're vertically integrated. Then we tack on, well, this would really help too. This will really help jobs too. And let me just give you an example of something that's another non-common sense element of where we are in the policy. We have 135 refineries in the United States. They make about 16 million barrels of product a day. And in the new 45Z, they banned co-processing. I have two major oil companies decided, okay, well, we're going to do a workaround of the ban. What we're going to do is we're going to quit running hydrocarbon oil through the refinery, and we're going to do a standalone renewable biodiesel refinery. It took the biodiesel industry in the United States 17 years to hit 1.5 billion gallons. It is going to take Phillips 66 Rodeo in California and Martinez Marathon 1.5 years to deliver 1.5 billion by the two refineries. So as I said to Secretary Buttigieg when he put me in front of the airlines, if you guys want 3 billion gallons of jet fuel, why don't you talk to the people that make 23 billion gallons a year? They know how to make the fuel, not the Environmental Defense Fund. And you know, that's the problem. I mean, you know, a lot of my friends and my wife's one of them, for Pete's sake, she worked for Al Gore. A lot of my friends want perfect instead of common sense and the good. And we need to start questioning that. And one of the ways that we can be successful as an industry and a community is, never mind where the U.S. government is right now, let's just all get on the same page of what we need to ask for so that everybody in this room can grow and thrive.
So depending on when you check your headlines, you either went to bed last night or woke up this morning reading a headline about a tariff proposal.
Yeah, 25% tariff.
25% for Canada.
Yeah, I wish he'd done that after I left. So yeah, I think one of the things there, you know, I've been talking to the Canadian Biofuels Associations. I've had a really, really wonderful relationship with them for the last 5 years. You know, I'm also really proud to say that when September 11th happened in my hometown of Washington, D.C., and all those people got killed, the one country that really stood up for America was Canada. And when you poll the American people, 70% of them say you're the #1 friend of America. And we don't punch the #1 friend of America in the mouth if you're listening to the citizens of the United States. And I got a feeling that that may not play so well. And I hope that, again, we can align, the industry align, the companies and the industries align, so that we can begin to have these conversations with Jerry's overseas, because we'll force the government to come to the table. This is a new area. And so we've got to mark our timing. Now, last thing on what Chris said about taxes. That is going to be the #1 thing that he's going to deliver in 2025. And the way he's going to deliver it, you need to understand the nomenclature of D.C. The way he's going to deliver it, he's going to do a CR. He's going to kick the budget into March, and then they're going to try to take a whole package called a reconciliation package, and they only need 1 vote more than the other side in the Senate, not 60, to pass it. And they are going to jam it down the Democrats' throat as deep as they can jam it. And that's where you're going to see this come down. So, Jeff, I want to just say to you, you've been a longtime friend and mentor for me. I know a lot of the people in this room. I'm so honored and so happy to be with you. And I wish you all the best. And if I can be of help, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone. Everybody else does. And this guy is amazing. This guy's really been a friend of mine, and we've been in the battles together. And it's really nice.
We can't let this descend into a mutual admiration society. Okay. They deserve better than that. Thanks, Mike. I think that's a great note to go out on.
Well, thank you very much. And please follow up with these two gentlemen if you're looking at doing some business in the United States. I've worked with Chris Hessler for over 20 years, and both these gentlemen are top drawer. So thank you very much, guys.